Alright everyone, welcome back to boss number 6 of the Black Temple. That is Gurtogg Bloodboil. That's this guy right here. Let's just get into it. So this is Gurtogg Bloodboil. It is a 2-stage recurring fight, which means we will do stage 1 and then stage 2. And then go back to stage 1 and keep repeating over and over again. He has some interesting abilities, but overall not too complicated of a fight. So, going into how we will position the boss, this is where we enter from. This is where the boss is standing. We will pull the boss over here to the left side waterfall. There's a waterfall here and a waterfall here. It's very obvious when you get there. We'll tank the boss here, facing this waterfall. One tank will be stacking on, or will be in front of the boss, tanking the boss. The other 2 tanks will be off to the side, unless they're trying to get stacks of the debuff, which we will talk about later, just for threat issues. Aside from that, all of the other melee will be stacking on the back left foot of the boss, as the tanks will be on the back right foot. The boss does a frontal cleave, so if threat does change to a tank, when he turns and starts hitting the tank, none of the melee will be on that side of the boss and won't get incidentally cleaved if something does happen. Aside from that, we will have all of the range stacking on triangle, except for 5 people who will be on X, and I'll explain that later. And yeah, that's basically it. So triangle and X are right here. The main way to figure out where triangle and X are is triangle is just a few steps in front of this water right here, and X is just right into the water. Alright, so going back into phase 1, or going into phase 1, phase 1 lasts 60 seconds, and then we'll go into phase 2. There is a stacking debuff on the tank, like I mentioned earlier, that will increasingly do more damage. It stacks up to 60 times. We really don't want tanks to be getting anywhere close to 60. If that happens, I mean, there's no way. Tanks are probably going to get, maybe up to 20 stacks, which would still be a lot. The debuff does around 1,000 damage a stack, or 1,000 damage every right here. It does 1,040 damage every 1 second for 24 seconds. So if you get a ton of stacks, it's going to start doing a ton of damage. So it's all about trying to keep it low for the tanks. This is entirely a threat fight in phase 1. So how threat works is it kind of works like Void Reaver, where we need 3 tanks, all with threat on the boss. The boss will do a knockback that will reduce threat, just like Void Reaver did, but it is a much harsher requirement in this case for threat, because he just does way more damage, and tanks will need to switch. As aside from Void Reaver, where you could technically just do it with 1 tank, tanks will need to switch because of this acidic wound debuff. So, if 1 tank gets way too far ahead on threat, they need to stop attacking and let the other tanks pick up threat. At the start, we might pump a misdirect into all of the tanks, and we might keep our 4th Hunter's misdirect for any other tank that's falling behind, so we can try to keep them up in threat. A way to increase your threat if you are the off tank is you can stand in front of the boss, and he does a cleave and a breath, and you can try to get yourself a stack, or a debuff stack, so that it'll start doing damage to you, so you can start doing more threat. In fact, we might have our off tanks at the very beginning of the fight. They might we're going to have them all stacking on the other tank until they all get 1 to 2 stacks of the debuff. Then the other off tanks will go off to the side, because you really can't have the stacks be too high, or else the damage is just going to be insurmountable. So, start off the fight, all 3 tanks will be stacking on top of each other, all trying to gain threat, and this phase is all just about threat and about the range trying to do the other mechanic correctly. So, aside from that, the boss also has a chance to do a bewildering strike, which just confuses a tank for 8 seconds. That is, again, why we have the tanks onto the other side, because if a tank does get confused, he will immediately turn to the next person on threat and start attacking them. And if the tanks are in the melee stack, then immediately he will be put onto the melee and can start cleaving onto them. And we don't want that. So this is a good setup for it to avoid just that happening. Yeah, so the tanks need to be the top 3 on threat. No one else should be touching him. It is not a DPS raise on phase 1. It is entirely just healing and tanking and threat on phase 1. The DPS will come into phase 2. So the other mechanic that is very important and everyone needs to know is Bloodboil. So what Bloodboil will do is it will put a crazy debuff on the 5 furthest players away from the boss. So what we need is we need 3 groups of 5 to soak the Bloodboil. How we will soak the Bloodboil is what I mentioned before with our ranged stack group. So the first group assigned to soaking the Bloodboil will have their feet in the water, so they are for sure the 5 farthest people away from this boss. Everyone else will be stacking up onto this triangle as tightly as possible, so no one else is, maybe if you are standing right here, you might be further away than these people and you might get a stack, and we cannot have extra stacks going on people. So the way to deal with it is the first group will be standing in the water until the first debuff of Bloodboil goes out. As soon as that debuff goes out, these 5 people will take a few steps forward to triangle, and the next group will take a few steps back to back here. So now we have a new set of 5 people all standing in the water. And you just keep doing that until all 3 groups have done it once, and then group 1 will go again, group 2 will go a second time, and after 5 total blood boils have gone out, the boss will turn into phase 2. That's when phase 2 will start. So really just need to pay attention. Pay attention to callouts, listen for when the group before you has blood boil, and when they step forward, you step back when it's your turn to step back. That's all it is. A few steps forward, a few steps back. Yep. So then we will go into phase 2. Now, phase 2 is probably the most healing intensive part in the entire dungeon. What's going to happen is it lasts 30 seconds, and one person in the raid will gain Fel Rage. They will get super big, gain a whole bunch of health and armor, and then the boss is going to run at them, charge them, and start smacking them as hard as he can. All healers need to be spamming this target as much as possible. If you are the person with Fel Rage, use any defensive cooldowns you can. If you are Druid, switch into Bear form. If you are a Mage, consider using, consider bringing armor pots for this fight and use an armor pot. If you are a hunter, use your aspect of the monkey or whatever the better version is called to possibly dodge one of the melees. Anything you can do to survive is going to be important. If you are a shaman or a healer or something, you can spam heal yourself. If you are a warlock, you can drain life. Literally anything you can do to keep yourself alive, do it. The next part about this, Do not feign. Do not vanish. Do not ice block or bubble. Do not do anything that drops threat. If you drop threat, he will immediately start attacking the next person on threat. It'll go back to regular threat. And during this phase, he gains a huge big attack speed and damage buff. So he will start deleting tanks and everyone else past that. Do not feign. Do not use these. Use any other defensive you have, but do not use threat reductions. The boss will also do a frontal breath, a cleave, and a knockback to anyone near the Fel Rage target. So when phase 2 starts, he will do a geyser on the Fel Raged person. It'll knock everyone back away from that target. That's your indication to everyone spread out. We will also be spreading out anyway. Just as soon as the 5th stack of Bloodboil has gone out, everyone should start spreading so that when he gets Fel Raged, he won't start cleaving on top of everyone. You can move if you have Fel Rage, but try not to move too much. Just try to point the boss away from the biggest clump of people, and that's about it. Aside from that, just stand there, take it, and try to survive. During this phase, there is no threat on the boss. So everyone will pop Lust and pop cooldowns and blow the boss up as fast as they can. He will not be moving. Healers will still be spamming tanks, or spamming the Fel Rage target. There's nothing else going on, as long as if you're not in front of the boss, as you should be spread, just stand there and attack him, and he's going to die. One thing to keep in mind is that as soon as phase 2 comes out, we will still have 2 sets of groups with Bloodboil out. Bloodboil does a lot of damage, so healers are going to have to split up duties. So generally what we're going to do is we're going to have any priest with Circle of Healing stay on the raid at the beginning of phase 2. And anyone else should be focusing that Fel Rage target. Let the priests keep the Fel Rage, or the raid alive with Bloodboils, and everyone else spam heal the Fel Rage target. If you do all of that, this Fel Rage will end. We will go back into phase 1, where we will tank the boss back, reposition him back towards the waterfall. Remember to watch out for threat, and go back to that. We should have 1 to 2 Fel Rage phases. This is incredibly healer intensive. The priest should be calling for innervates, and we should be giving it to them as soon as they call for it. Healers will carry this fight, and as long as healers can keep people up, and people do the Bloodboil mechanic correctly, and people spread for Fel Rage, the boss is going to die. Nothing else much to it. Pay attention to threat. Do not be above the 3rd tank on threat. And that's going to be Gurtogg dead. So, yeah. I will see you all in the next one.